This is The Red Line, where we interview three big geopolitical experts on one subject shaping the news both here and overseas. And I'm your host, Michael Hilliard. Let's go back to 2013, as then US President Barack Obama comes on television to announce he'll be asking Congress for approval to take military actions in Syria. And the world watches closely to see if the US will move for another Gulf War or another long, drawn-out conflict that destabilizes an already fractious region. Whilst the eyes of the world are on Washington, with little pomp or significance, Chinese leader Xi Jinping takes a trip to the capital of Kazakhstan to give a speech at Nazarbayev University. At the time, few had any idea how significant that speech would be, but Xi announced a grand plan for Chinese foreign policy, a plan that would wake the sleeping giant, as he would call it. The plan was to invest in nations throughout Asia in a 21st century version of the US's Marshall Plan throughout Europe. What she announced in that university speech in the Kazakh desert was the Belt and Road Initiative, something today that has become the cornerstone of China's entire doctrine. The aim being to invest in infrastructure throughout the world to build better relations and help Chinese businesses gain greater access to the world markets. Dozens of nations would be involved in the program, welcoming the seemingly endless and easy money pouring from Beijing at the time. But whilst the money came in, everyone wanted to see what China's aims were, and what China would do if someone defaulted on their loans. What would China ask for when the debt came due? The country that became the canary in the coal mine for this project was the island of Sri Lanka, just 30 kilometers southeast of China's regional rival and the other Asian giant, India. The Sri Lankan economy had been stagnant for a long time, having just come out of a brutal multi-decade civil war, and China looking to invest and grow the country seemed to be a deal almost too good to be true. So Sri Lanka took the money and built a bunch of desperately needed infrastructure, including a huge deep-water port that sat right on one of the busiest logistics routes in the entire world. The good days were good, but the bad days were bad. And eventually Sri Lanka began to default on its debts to China, and so the world watched to see how China would respond. Beijing offered to relieve much of the debt in exchange for a 99-year lease on the brilliant port that they had just built in Sri Lanka. International scholars started asking questions. Should the US-backed IMF have loaned Sri Lanka the money to prevent the port going to China, which would have meant using mostly US money to pay for Sri Lankan debts to China? Or should the US just let this run its course and watch China debt trap a crucial Indian Ocean nation for multiple generations? Sri Lanka has been the test case for much of the Belt and Road Initiative, and to understand what Sri Lanka went through recently may help us roadmap out the future path for other BRI nations like Pakistan, Cambodia, Kenya, and Myanmar. So let's take a look at the complicated island that is Sri Lanka, and why Sri Lanka's current economic crisis may tell us more than just the impact of low tourism. And to take us through some of the history of this island, we turn to our first guest.
Part 1. Where the Tigers Sleep.
Sri Lanka is an island in the Indian Ocean, geostrategically well positioned. If you look at, it's been mapped from the time of the ancient time, from Ptolemy to many other cartographers. The name Serendib comes from, it was called, Arabs called Sri Lanka Serendib. And serendipity, the word serendipity comes from Sri Lanka. Yeah, with a very rich history and ancient civilization spanning more than 2,000 years. So that I would describe Sri Lanka in this way.
Asanga Abeyagoonasekera is a senior fellow at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies and the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, working with the Department of Defense. He joins us today.
1948, Sri Lanka got independence from the British. Ever since that, we had two parties ruling the country, one more liberal, another very nationalist political party, which they made coalitions. If you look at the difference between Malaysia and Sri Lanka, in terms of is the policy prescription that Sri Lanka used. They used a very, I would say, before 1977, a very inward policies. Ultra-nationalist sentiments are quite high in Sri Lanka. So before 77, then comes the liberalization and also opening up of the economy after 1977, which again had many social issues which was not addressed. The minority concerns was a serious issue which was neglected by many governments, regimes. Social disharmony was seen. We had 3 decades of civil war. Human rights abuse is clearly evident in Sri Lanka. Multiple, social unrest. If you look at, we had 2 youth insurrections for social inequality, political justice in 1971 and 1989. Thousands of youth died. So what we see is, it is a dysfunctionality of the policy prescription that is put forward by subsequent governments, as well as the present government, which is projecting a very ultra-nationalist, Sinhalese Buddhist posture. And what you see is a heavy militarization coming in for the first time. So all this, adds that why we could not become, economically sound like Malaysia or Singapore. Singapore has been quoted by our leaders, political leaders, many times, but unfortunately, we're far from the policy prescription that we are adopting, as a country.
One of the major divides in the country is between the Sinhalese and the Tamils. The Sinhala, who predominantly live in the centre, south and west of the island, follow Buddhism and make up about 75% of the population. And the Thamil, who predominantly live in the north and east of the country, who majority follow Hinduism and Islam, and make up around 20 to 25% of the country. Although there is a significant population of Tamils also living in the south of India. Can you take us through this ethnic divide still present in Sri Lanka today?
The division has widened. I would say, if you look at from the last regime to this regime, ever since the end of the civil war, multiple promises have been given to the diaspora as well as the minority community of a genuine reconciliation process, as well as addressing concerns on human rights. They're only limited to rhetoric. It's nothing. There is no concrete or genuine process that's been adopted. And this is a serious concern. And what you see is significant suppression. I've been monitoring for the last, I would say 1 year, what's going on. We did a ground research from January, which we captured very disturbing news coming from civil society actors and many others in Sri Lanka. It's very unfortunate that minorities have been suppressed, as well as the Prevention of Terrorism Act has been used multiple times, which is the PTA is an act where the arbitrary arrests are done. So more than 300 of them people have been arrested in connection with national security, saying it's national security, but you see a lot of suppression going on in the country. What's sad about it is that there is no clear solution coming out to the minorities, Muslims, as well as the Tamilians. So with this absence, what you see is a significant disharmony. Then you have the regime, like the Minister of Provincial Councils, who says about, I don't believe in provincial councils, so does not want to work on decentralization of power. It's a more of a central authority that you have right now, obviously with the military footprint growing in the island. And this is a serious concern for the minority. The recent appointment, weeks ago, they appointed One Country, One Law task force chairman, was an ultra-nationalist Buddhist monk. where you don't have, in the task force, you don't have anybody from the minority communities representing. So these are clear signs of not going in the right direction.
So to give a really quick summary of the Sri Lankan Civil War, and obviously there'll be more material we'll link at the end with a more detailed account, but when the British left Sri Lanka in 1948 and they gained their independence, Tamils were only about 11.5% of the population, but the British turned over rule of the island to the Tamils. So 11% of the population and the Tamils ruled over the 75% of the population that was the Sinhalese. Obviously, the Sinhalese were unhappy and used many tactics to try and undermine Tamil rule, like in 1956 when the country's official language was changed to Sinhalese, meaning that many Tamil government workers who didn't speak Sinhalese were forced out of the government. And this was just many such tactics that increased the ethnic tensions, and tensions rose between the two groups. So in 1983, Tamil insurgents rose up hoping to form a separate Tamil nation, known as the Tamil Tigers. The war was incredibly brutal, with car bombs and suicide bombs and lots of other tactics that were very nasty used by both sides. But with help from the Indians, the Sinhalese managed to win the war against the Tamils in 2009, occupying their last strongholds in the northeast of the island. But whilst the war is technically over, the reasons for the war are still there, and there are still bombings and shootings being carried out today by both sides. So Asanga, can you take us through the impact that this is still having on Sri Lankan society even now, decades after the war is finished?
It ended in a very brutal way. So in 2009, 30 years, it came to a point that, multiple political solutions was discussed, but it came to a point that it had, it ended in a brutal way in 2009. So, but the concern for the minorities was that, okay, there would be some solutions after the ending of the civil war, that minority voices would be given much more hearing, as well as there would be a solution of decentralization. This is the 13th Amendment of Sri Lanka, the decentralization of power, which many, even the present Prime Minister has clearly mentioned. I'm ready to give you not 13, but 13 plus, which means extended version of regional decentralized power to the regions. But it never happened. It's not happening at the ground level. So be it the northern province, be it the eastern province, so multiple promises have been made, but it's not been done. So what they're using right now is a significant security or militarized model to suppress the minority voices, as well as using national security as a pretext for everything, like when it comes to the Muslim concerns, when it comes to the arrest of, so it would put national security as a priority, what you see 2 days ago was a shocking situation in Colombo, was that thousands of people, violating the court orders, as well as violating the police orders, are coming into the capital to protest against what's going on in the country. And this is, I would say, an initial indicator of people's pressure built to many levels. Economic condition is one, the democratic, concerns, suppression of media, and many others. So this is I see it as an initial sign of course, the general public's frustration.
And all of these tensions are currently bubbling up during a period of crisis inside Sri Lanka. There has been a run of food shortages throughout the country at the moment, exacerbated by a foreign currency crisis. This is made worse as well by black markets now forming around basic food goods, with people buying up the goods as they come into the country and warehousing them, causing a storage and driving up the price artificially to a point where a lot of the population cannot afford the basic food staples. But can you take us through some of the other issues facing the Sri Lankan population at the moment?
while you have the local the supply chain issues as well as pressure from the farmers and all that, then you have the external pressure also coming in from nations like China. Many military have been appointed even to control prices, all that. So that's why I mentioned earlier. I mean, they use national security as well as they are trying to destabilize the government. So they use national security as a pretext for everything. You can't justify what the government is saying clearly. And what you have is a shortage, and you can see those from the fuel shortage to the dysfunctional of the refinery in the Sapagaskanda, which is in the just outside Colombo area. So you see it's a dysfunctionality of the policies as well as implementation.
With all this in mind, do you think we're about to see an economic storm hit Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I mean, if Sri Lanka doesn't go for IMF or some sort of assistance, it needs to go right now, because what you have is a serious economic crisis. Debt is one thing, but then foreign exchange, which is flowing into the country is bare minimum. So it's not enough actually for Sri Lankan economy to survive. Then you have various sort of pressure coming into the country. I mean, earlier we look at even the diaspora, the money that's coming in, the remittances that's coming into the country, has been seriously affected. Not only the Tamilian diaspora outside the country is angry with the country, but also the Sinhalese diaspora. Now, during my time in Washington, as well as outside the country, I clearly captured that it's not only the Tamilians, it's the Sinhalese Buddhists who are living outside Sri Lanka is really not happy of what's going on. And you see multiple protests in Rome, in various Milan. So I think the remittances will be a serious issue, because Sri Lanka gets more than about 8 billion remittances every year. So the import restrictions that's been put, I mean, I don't think they can go forward with limiting the import restrictions, and because you see significant pressure built from the polity coming in from for the people. So they would have to come to some sort of a balance. But then again, they would have to find the tourism coming back again, as well as various others. One of the data points that we found was the youth trying to leave Sri Lanka. I mean, that's been more than what you have seen, as not in an ordinary level. So you see a lot of youth trying to leave the country. You see like hundreds of them queued for passports, and also at the consular service. And some of the interviews that was captured at that time, from the youth, like they've received a serious frustration by the youth, and there's, so I think the overall Sri Lanka will lose a significant amount of youth talent, and you see a brain drain going into nations. I mean, leaving the country. Like I said earlier, I mean, the country has gone through 2 youth insurrections, so with the youth frustration. And I could see some sort of pattern that the youth are leaving this time, and then you see frustrated of what's going on. I mean, this regime as well as the subsequent regimes, I mean, multiple promises of jobs as well as the rising economic cost to live was a serious issue. So most of the interviews from those youth were about the political instability as well as the economic insecurity that has crept into the country, as well as affecting directly their jobs, as well as and unemployment.
The problems on the island of Sri Lanka are compounding. The ethnic tensions are once again building, and the bombings that come with them are beginning to return. There's a food shortage, and people are growing tired of the long waits in some of the cities for basics like flour and sugar. And on top of this, the country's debts are coming back to haunt them. So far, Sri Lanka has barely scraped by paying the minimum to avoid defaulting. But that was before the economy took a further downturn, and tourism has not bounced back like they assumed it would, so the desperately needed income of foreign currency is not coming in. And compounding this problem, investors are becoming increasingly nervous about sinking money into the island, under the fear of government procurements and ethnic instability. So what do you tackle first? Do you solve the food and basic goods shortages, or do you solve the looming debt crisis? The government has a tough road ahead. So let's turn to a member of that government and ask them what their roadmap looks like.
Part 2. Feeding the loan sharks.
Sri Lanka is important to the, dynamics of the region, mainly due to its location. So we have India to our north as our immediate neighbor. To the south, we have the Indian Ocean until the Antarctica. And then also Sri Lanka is in close proximity to the busiest, the shipping lanes, lane in the world, where off the south coast of Sri Lanka, more than 80,000 ships travel every year. So I think these dynamics makes it very important. The location makes Sri Lanka very important to the geopolitical dynamics.
Tharaka Balasuriya is the current Minister for Regional Cooperation and Foreign Relations for the government of Sri Lanka, and is also an MP representing the district of Kigale. He joins us today.
As you may know, that we built a harbour in Hambantota, and 1/3 of the debt for that harbour was already paid. But the previous government decided to lease it to China for 99 years. But we still can take advantage of things such as bunkering, and also we are planning on, we have started the Hambantota industrial zone, a special economic zone. More further inland, I think the areas such as Monragala also can, greatly benefit due to the location. But also most of the ports in Sri Lanka, the access transshipment hubs. So now, assuming that let's say India's growth for the next 10 years will be 8% or more, then I think there will be a natural growth for the Sri Lankan ports. For example, as it is already, the Colombo port, 87% of the containers are transshipment, and only 13% comes to Sri Lanka. And there are also other, let's say, if you look at countries like Bangladesh, or if you look at even countries like Australia, it's far more easy to have feeder ships to Sri Lanka, and then rather than going to Singapore, and thereby there'll be a save in time and length of the journey. So I think that these reasons also will be advantages to Sri Lanka. And then also, I think, for example, in Australia, for environmental reasons, some of the ports cannot be, the dredging of the sand cannot take place. Colombo and Hambantota, with the future expansions, will both be deep water ports, and then we can use these ports as transshipment hubs and use feeder vessels to connect with the region.
Much of the controversy around Sri Lanka's finances at the moment stems from a deal done by the previous administration and the Chinese government for Hambantota port. Hambantota is a deep-water port on the Sri Lankan coast, right in the heart of one of the most crucial shipping lanes for the world economy. As part of the deal, China would give Sri Lanka loads of money to build the port, and the government could pay it back to China very slowly. The port, though, was unsuccessful in luring as much traffic as predicted, and the Sri Lankan government was struggling to pay back its debts. So, under a financial crunch, the Chinese offered to forgive the debt in exchange for a 99-year lease on the port. So in the end, China ended up with a crucial deep-water port only a short distance from regional adversary India. And with debts once again looming for the Sri Lankan government, do you think they may once again turn to someone like China or the US and exchange ports or land for debt relief? Is the government looking at putting that option back on the table?
I think, it's the certainly I would test that, the length of time, 99 years is a very long period of time. If you look at last 3 months in Sri Lanka, then we have had investments for the West Terminal from India, for the Adani Group for, I think, about $700 and $800 million. And then we have had a investment from the United States for $240 million power project, and then dollars. And then we have an investment from China for an elevated highway for about $700 million. I could be just a little bit off the figures here and there, but around about that amount. So it's not where the investment comes from, but it's how it's structured and the length of the time, which is important. So most of the investments, which what I spoke about, they're like after about 30 years, they're built on operate basis and then built on transfer basis. So after about 30 years, the government of Sri Lanka or the state institute will be owning that asset. So I think, the lease for 99 years was too long. Certainly, if you brought in an equity partner from wherever the equity partner comes, I think, it doesn't matter as long as Sri Lanka gets a best deal at the end of the day.
So where do you think Sri Lanka should be looking for financial partners here? Should it be looking towards India? Should it look towards China, towards ASEAN? Where should Sri Lanka be looking to build these financial partnerships?
We've been trying to diversify our trade. We've been looking at different partners. We want to improve our trade relationship with all our partners. Certainly China and India. India is also India is strategically important to Sri Lanka, and then Sri Lanka and vice versa. So as one Indian state former secretary of the foreign ministry stated that Sri Lanka is like a aircraft carrier off the coast of India. So we need to be mindful of India's ambitions and also India's security concerns. So we need to ensure that India is comfortable with its security concerns. But as far as trade is concerned, I don't think that we need to restrict it to only towards the east. We should also look at the Middle Eastern countries. We are moving from more of a to a multipolar world in the future.
Hambantota right now is a purely civilian port, but if China was to offer you a good chunk of money, would your government be willing to let China convert it to a military naval base?
No, certainly not. We have followed the policy of non-alignment and the policy of neutrality since the 1950s, and we feel that with more and more with the geopolitical tensions rising in the world and particularly in Asia, it makes more sense to continue with our neutrality and non-aligned policy. But also, I must say that just because you follow neutral or non-aligned policy, it doesn't mean that it's a policy of inaction. Certainly, with our partners, with the friendly countries, we follow a policy of friendly to all nations. Wherever there can be joint cooperations, we should certainly collaborate, such as the case of piracy, such as the case of terrorism, and such as the case of narcotics. So we collaborate in all these areas for the security of the region and the country.
With that in mind, though, should someone like Sri Lanka look to an organisation like ASEAN and try and join ASEAN to build economic partnerships?
I think ASEAN is a very good role model to follow. If you look at the intra-trade in the ASEAN countries, it's about 24 to 25% compared to, let's say, the SAARC region, where the intra-trade, I think, is about 5%. Of course, there are other factors why we are at 5%, the political tensions between India and China. We are also a dialogue partner of ASEAN. We should also look at ASEAN as one way is as a role model to evaluate in the South Asian regions, but also to as a trading partner. We should I think develop our the trading links with the ASEAN countries. There are other organizations such as BIMSTEC where some of these countries come into the fray. So I see it as a good thing, and I see it as something which we should look to develop on our own, a similar mechanism.
When you look at a map of Sri Lanka, there is a big isthmus jutting out of the northwestern tip of the island towards the Indian coast. And India has a similar isthmus that connects towards Sri Lanka. In fact, the gap between the two countries is just 30 kilometers of open water and could be connected with a short bridge. Connecting these two countries together with a bridge would connect Sri Lankan highways to the Eurasian continent. So is there any plans to actually connect the two sides of the isthmuses up and form the Adams Bridge anytime in the near future?
It was proposed by the former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. I think that there'll be a lot of other things which will have to be come into consideration before such a bridge is put up, such as the environmental impact which might have for the Mana basins. There's large amounts of seagrass in that area, and if we put up a bridge, it can have some impact on that. But also, I think and then also the feasibility of the bridge, the cost of the bridge, and all those things has to be evaluated, because we can have trade between India even using vessels and feeder vessels.
So you've been talking for a long time now about forming a closer relationship between Colombo and Tharaka. But how would you sum up the current relationship between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh?
Very good, actually. I think the Prime Minister and was there for earlier this year, and then I too visited with the Prime Minister. If you look at the trade between Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, it's at an all-time high. We are negotiating a preferential trade agreement with Bangladesh, and I'm optimistic towards the first quarter or so of next year. We should finalize it. If you look at a lot of the Sri Lankan companies in the manufacturing, particularly in the garment sector, has invested in Bangladesh. We have, I think, more than 2 billion worth of investments in Bangladesh. There's a high number of Sri Lankan executives working for the Bangladeshi companies. So I think the relationship between Bangladesh and Sri Lanka at an all-time high.
The Indian Ocean is continuing to become an incredibly important space on the geopolitical chessboard between China, India, and the US. So why do you think governments from around the world are now looking at their Indian Ocean policies? And do you think the Indian Ocean will become even more important as the years come by?
Well, I think it's mainly to do with the rise of China and China's location and future supply routes. If you look at China, you have the Gobi Desert on one side, and then you have the Himalayas on the other side, and then you have the jungles of Indochina. So the most of the trade can be done through the sea routes. So the sea routes are absolutely important to China. So with the growth of China, they need to ensure that these sea routes are secured and their supplies from maybe the African subcontinent will continue to come. So I think it's important mainly due to those particular reasons and also the growth of Asia. There is a power shift in the power shift in the world. So the Indian Ocean is the theater where everything happens because the supplies are transported through Indian Ocean, and still the bulk of trade is 90% of trade is done through shipping.
Sri Lanka's location has always been its most important asset. It's why the Portuguese and the French and the British all put lots of effort into securing it over the years. But now, more than ever, its location is once again proving critical. Sri Lanka sits on the edge of most of the world's important shipping routes, the ones connecting East Asia, South Asia, East Africa, and Europe, and all these go right past Sri Lanka. China has already made big partnerships with Pakistan for their proximity to the Indian Ocean. But is Sri Lanka next on the list? Will Sri Lanka be the new Chinese access point to the Indian Ocean? Well, for that, we turn to our final guest.
Part 3. Drifting apart.
The Sri Lankan government is partially correct to say that tourism is down. We don't have the same level of people coming into the country at the minute due to the pandemic, obviously. However, these issues are also house-made, simply because Sri Lanka has taken several loans in the past from international financial institutions, but also from regional powers, most importantly China, in order to finance its business in the country. And the Sri Lankan government, in particular the Rajapaksa clan, has not dealt with finances very correctly, and the budgeting was not planned with wise foresight, and it's now backfiring very badly on the people of Sri Lanka due to house-made problems such as loans and bad budgeting.
Thamil Ananthavinayagan is an associate at the University of Nottingham and a lecturer in international law. Thamil specialises in the engagement of Sri Lanka with the United Nations human rights machinery and is the author of Sri Lanka, Human Rights and the United Nations. He joins us today.
I do think that it will be, again, China that will provide fresh money from the East. I'm not very sure if the IMF, at the current condition of Sri Lanka, is willing to give the country the money that it wants and needs. The IMF, with which I have also my considerable problems as an international lawyer, is not the best avenue, and neither is China, by the way. Sri Lanka might have to also look at new powers in the region, such as India, and we are aware that Narendra Modi's government and the Sri Lankan government are building better ties. But at the moment, it seems, due to the good relationships that the Rajapaksa government has, they will build those ties or reinvent the ties to China and hope, I guess, for fresh money coming from there.
China is desperately searching at the moment for additional military ports for its navy along the Indian Ocean shipping routes. With Sri Lanka so desperate for capital at the moment, do you think they would ever consider leasing a naval base to China or the US for a cash injection?
The Sri Lankan government is quite nationalist, and any intrusion of Western powers on the soil is regarded with considerable caution in the country. We've seen that shortly after the tsunami catastrophe back in December 2004, if I'm not mistaken, that there were already these ideas of establishing such a military base by Western powers, but that was then rejected. And also, China and India wouldn't be very keen to have any Western military base in the area. It's something that would also backfire at the Sri Lankan government in their economic ties that they have built with these regional powers. However, we know as well that China is considering to build this military base in Sri Lanka, but they haven't gone 100% to that extent. And also one particular example from the past is quite important to mention, and that is somewhat a trauma for Tamils and Sinhalese alike, and that is the intrusion of India in Sri Lanka in 1987 and their withdrawal shortly after. That shows very much this rejection of any military powers on the island, even on the side of the people of Sri Lanka.
Not just Sri Lanka, but also India worries about Thamil separatism in the southern provinces of India and the northern provinces of Sri Lanka. Do you think now that the war's over, the issue of Thamil separatism has finally been put to rest? Or do you think the Indian and Sri Lankan governments still have a long way to go forward to bring these communities together once again?
India won't get involved. To be very frank, okay? India won't get involved in this way anymore. One would need political will in New Delhi, and Narendra Modi is not very sympathetic to the Tamil cause, as perhaps Indira Gandhi was once, and later on her son. And then that particular relationship deteriorated over years between the Tamils and him. The relationships in Sri Lanka between the communities is difficult. There's a correlation between the geopolitical location and the internal cohesion of the country. It's the pearl of the Indian Ocean, as Marco Polo described it once, but it's also a country that is fraught with its internal discrepancies and internal contradictions. And we are now 12 years after the war, and we still didn't have a proper reconciliation in Sri Lanka. We still didn't have a proper discussion about how to move forward with a state building, multicultural and multi-ethnic state building in post-coloniality. This has not happened. The reason also why the Sri Lankan government never wanted the Tamils to break away was not only for the sake of national unity. There was some nationalist impulse in the country to keep the island together as one administrative unit out of this mythical idea that Sri Lanka belongs to the Sinhalese. But also they wanted to access the northern and eastern parts of Sri Lanka, which are hugely important and strategically important, as they are facing China and India. So if the Tamils had won the war in 2009, and I mentioned the Tamil Tigers in this regard, because they were considering themselves as the representatives of the Tamils, then this would have had major implications on the geopolitical location of Sri Lanka and the Sinhalese. Even if there is anything flaring up in the future, I won't see the Indians intervening. I won't see the Chinese intervening. But more importantly to stress is, there might be issues flaring up in the future. I don't see it happening in the short term or in the midterm. But there are issues unresolved, and Sri Lanka is perhaps post-war, but not post-conflict.
We've seen nations like India, China, and Australia trying to reach out to the Indian Ocean nations like the Maldives, Mauritius, and Madagascar. Do you think we'll see Sri Lanka also try these same kinds of diplomatic, military, and financial outreach to the other Indian Ocean island nations?
Yeah, look, I don't see the Sri Lankan government now reaching out to any island nations at this very minute. It might happen in the midterm. I think there are more economic woes, but also political woes in the country. So I don't see that happening now in the short term. But with the effect of climate change, there might be the possibilities for the island nations to come together and build a front, most likely with the Maldives. I mean, there has been already some cooperation with the Maldives on different fronts, but as of now, I don't think that this will happen. But the fact of climate change will certainly make a different way of impact on these consideration in the future, I guess.
So what do you think the future for Sri Lanka lies? Should it adopt a big brother, little brother relationship with India, or form a similar relationship to what China and Pakistan have with each other? Or should it look towards ASEAN for a spot out from the middle of those two? What direction should Sri Lanka take going forward?
Oh gosh, it's a very good question. As long as the Rajapaksa government is in power, I think the primary focus will be China. I think the Rajapaksa government has built their political goals, policies, their predictions to stay in power surrounding the influence of China. So I think China will be the major focus. The Sri Lankan government has been always very, very intelligent, very clever, I must admit, in building and forging allegiances in the region. And interestingly, Sri Lanka was in the position to forge allegiances between China and its arch nemesis, namely India, at the same time, and also with Pakistan. So that is quite an achievement, I must say, that such a little island nation really has managed to build all these various political ties to these major powers in the region. I still think that the future of Sri Lanka will be predominated by the relationship between China and Sri Lanka. The Rajapaksa government came into power also on the premise to revive the economy, but also on this nationalist platform, which was really supported and financially supported and underpinned by the influence of China. So for now, and for the next 5 years at least, the major regional power that they will be looking at will be China, and I don't think that will change at all as long as the Rajapaksa government is the leading clan in the country.
But with the tensions rising in the region, will Sri Lanka be able to keep neutral forever? Can they keep neutrality at all costs?
I mean, the creation of the Hambantota port and also the Trincomalee port, which came with heavy investment of the Indians as well. Sri Lanka is doing this not only for economic gains, but also they have an interest in establishing their geopolitical role and reinvent their geopolitical role in the region. And certainly the US now with Joe Biden's administration is quite interested like previous administrations, especially under Barack Obama. Barack Obama's government already shifted its focus towards Asia, considering China and the emergence of India as a power in the region. I think also considering the human rights discussion at the international level, the US is taking a more proactive role on these issues of human rights in Sri Lanka and so on and so forth. That is not met with open arms by the Sri Lankan government, because they consider that as an internal matter. And that is something that they cherish and value the Chinese about. The Chinese give you the money, and they don't ask about anything happening in the country. They just want stability for their own interest. Whereas the Americans are using human rights as a Trojan horse for intrusion into the country. And that is the manipulation of human rights in the current times. And also, I mean, as a matter of fact, for many decades, human rights is used as such a Trojan horse by Western countries. So Sri Lanka will look more towards China and favor them over the US, or also in light of this human rights considerations, where China wouldn't ask too many questions.
And lastly, what do you see in the future for Sri Lanka over the next 5 to 10 years?
I've been asked this question once about the end of the war in Sri Lanka. And my answer was simply, I don't see that Sri Lanka will grow together as a nation. And I can give the same prediction now as well. I don't see Sri Lanka growing together as a nation. That is in terms of the political outlook internally, and when it comes to the external outlook and the geopolitical outlook intertwined with that question there, I think that the economic problems are going to certainly deteriorate in Sri Lanka, and I will see a stronger intervention of China in the region and in the country. The Rajapaksa government will dominate the next 5 years, at least, in the country. The opposition is very weak. And as long as the Sri Lankan government, led by the Rajapaksa clan, is pandering towards the nationalist base, they will have the electoral support. But if that is paying off economically, I highly doubt.
I always remember something my dad used to say a lot. The man who treads water in the middle of the river eventually drowns. It seems rather prescient for this situation, with Sri Lanka being that man in the middle of the river. Sri Lanka is desperate to hold true to its non-aligned and neutral political policies, but more and more, it's only just keeping its head above water with its growing financial debts. The middle of the river strategy may not be tenable forever, and eventually Colombo may have to seek the solid ground of legacy partners in India, or the financial behemoth that is China. And whatever side Sri Lanka joins will gain an incredibly strategic position in a crucial area of the world. For now though, Sri Lanka continues to bob in the water, trying not to fully commit to either side. But it sure seems that the current is beginning to push them one way over the other. Thank you so much for tuning into the show this week. Here at The Red Light, we've been busier than ever with extra analysis and content for our website, as well as bringing you a bunch of new events in December. We'll be having a public game of Hearts of Iron, the World War II simulator, round 5 of our famous geopolitics pub quiz, and a game of GeoGuessr, all of which you can join for free. And to keep up to date with everything we're up to, and to find out all the details for these events, you can find the info on Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, and Discord on the handle @TheRedLinePod. Or if you're keen to follow me on Twitter, I'm on the handle MikeHilliottOz. Oz is in Australia. This episode on Sri Lanka is dedicated to our patron Jim Robertshaw, who is the latest Patreon to sign up as of the time of recording. This show is only possible with the support of our listeners, who donate a small amount of money each month to make sure we can keep the show going, and we cannot thank them enough. So if you feel like you could spare a couple of dollars, we would greatly appreciate it. But for now, Jim, the Sri Lanka episode is dedicated to you. As usual, here are our 3 book recommendations. The first is Sri Lanka, The Policy of Human Rights by Hans J. Freddy, for a look at the internal tensions in the country. The second is The Cage, The Fight for Sri Lanka by Gordon Weiss, for an analysis on the war with the Thamil Tigers. And the third is The Conundrum of an Island by Asanga Abeyagoonasekera, on Sri Lanka's place in the region. I want to thank this week's guests, Asanga Abeyagoonasekera, Tharaka Balasuriya, and Thamil Ananthavinayagan. All of you were absolutely amazing to work with on this one, and we look forward to having you back on the program soon. I also want to thank my staff, Owen Swift, the producer, Perry Grace and Daniela Zivella, the research assistants and writers, Mark Spencer, our second voiceover artist, Joe Hawthorne, our audio cleaner, Marissa Rafter, our videographer, who just released an amazing video on our YouTube channel on Indonesia, and Nick Much, our field correspondent. I am incredibly proud of this team and all the work they keep putting out. The show will be back in another fortnight with another international episode. But until then, thank you, and good night.
The views and opinions expressed in this episode are solely those of Michael, our guests, and the Redline Podcast. They do not represent any government or organization and are solely our own. For more information, please visit theredlinepodcast.com.